I'm Sienna. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kid Straight Mom. Happy New Year. I hope everybody had a good holiday. This year is off to an eventful start. We're thinking of anybody in California affected by the wildfires. I know that people love to hate LA, but I unabashedly and unironically love the LA area. So today we're really excited to welcome Dr. Michele McKinnie. She is a licensed psychologist, director of clinical training for the Big Sky Psychological Consortium, and an American Psychology Association Council representative. Michele, is there anything else you want to introduce about you or your experience?
You hit all the high points. Thank you so much to you both for having me here. And I will just say that I've been practicing for 25 years in private practice primarily and work with a large diversity of individual clients and patients on a number of issues. I'm happy to be here and to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
We're really excited to have you. So as I mentioned in the video I posted recently, we are talking about ways for people to process the trauma that can occur when faced with family members who are not accepting of LGBTQ plus people, their lifestyles, their relationships. And that can be such a difficult situation because these are people that, they're family and they're important to you on this level that goes beyond casual relationships. And so even if you say their opinion doesn't matter, I think that it's really hard to kind of extricate the feelings of impact when family members react negatively. According to Psychology Today, almost half of LGBTQ plus young adults are estranged from at least one family member. And LGBTQ plus adults are twice as likely as non-LGBTQ plus adults to say they're not close to immediate family members. This is not uncommon to have family members that aren't accepting, aren't supportive, and a lot of times, that can lead to estrangement, which is sometimes good for the psychological health of the LGBTQ plus person, but, is not ideal for families because it can have these ripple effects of, sometimes some family members are caught in the middle, trying to support one person and being alienated by another. It just, blows up in a lot of ways. We know that family rejection increases the odds of substance misuse and suicide attempts in transgender people. And alternately, that LGBTQ plus youth with families that affirm their sexuality and gender identity are almost 50% less likely to make a suicide attempt than those with unsupportive families. So this matters a lot. Michele, handing this to you for a minute. If you had somebody come in and say, I went home for Christmas and, had an incident where a family member rejected my lifestyle, told me that the relationship I'm in is not a real relationship, that my partner is just a friend, what kind of support would you offer? Like, what do you think would be helpful in that situation?
Gosh, there's so many layers to that situation, to be honest with you. I think that, particularly if this was a new experience that the individual wasn't, the young person or older person wasn't aware they were going to encounter, I think I would offer just some recognition of how shocking and hurtful that would be to start. And I think if there are, I'm a professional and in a professional setting, but I think this holds true for family members and friends and allies to really be able to think about the person's experience who in this, what I would argue probably might have felt like a hostile environment or certainly an unsafe environment. It'd be really important to be able to just acknowledge that their experience is valid. I think it is so complicated with family because if this was a friend or an acquaintance, we could say, oh gosh, this doesn't feel like a good relationship for me to stay in, or I'm going to need some support to navigate this relationship. But given that it is family, there are these extra layers of sort of societal messages of we should be close with our family, societal pressures that we should respect what our family members have to say, that our family members' opinions matter. And I think it's really important to take a step back and take a step to the side and start to examine some of those assumptions that we have about family. And I am certainly not saying we should just reject our family members. I think this is an opportunity for us to grow our capacity to really hold the complexity of human relationships, all the while making sure that we are keeping ourselves safe and that we are supported and protected. And sometimes that's really hard in family situation, right? We can get messages from outside family members who say, "Oh, come on, your dad loves you. He doesn't mean it. It doesn't matter. I see you. It doesn't matter. Or just go be in relationship with this person who just really hurt you." And not even about definitely about what they see as lifestyle choices, but that I really recognize as a reflection of your identity, right? So that's a bind that I think people can find themselves in. That's quite painful. And it's important to recognize how painful that bind is, because we might not want to reject our family members, even when we feel rejected by them. I don't know. I could probably talk for half an hour about all the layers. I think it is so complicated.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many factors. Like, what does that family relationship look like? Did you have a good relationship anyway? There's a lot there. So it seems that talking to other family members about the need to respect how that affects you would be an important conversation to have, and maybe a navigable conversation. If you have to go to somebody and say, when you say just like smile and put up with your aunt, she doesn't mean it. That's very hurtful to me, because even though you accept me, I need you to understand that being in that situation is really painful for me. Would you encourage people to have those conversations with other family members? Again, depending on their relationship.
Yeah, I think, again, families are so interesting. There are ways that we can create factions and we can create splits. We can look like we are the source of the problem, right? And I want to be really cautious about encouraging someone who's already feeling vulnerable and maybe targeted or outcast to put themselves in a position where they are creating more trouble. I mean, there is good trouble to make, right? But I think it's really important that you know that you have an ally in your family who you could speak to about. I know you're trying to be helpful, and I do want to let you know that it's hard for me to spend time with my aunt or my father or my sister. It's hard for me to do that when I feel like they don't accept me. And I really feel like I'm in a bind in the family. And would you be someone who I could talk this difficulty through with? Or do you really feel like you need to pick a side? Because what we want to do, we're so divisive right now as a society. It's just heartbreaking to me. And I really feel strongly that we have to look at how do we build some bridges, again, that are not going to collapse underneath us or that are not going to fall down on top of us and hurt us. So certainly, I think if there are safe family members who aren't going to just say, well, that person's a jerk and you shouldn't talk to them anyway, and I won't talk to them either, then yes, absolutely, talk to those family members. If you live in a family where everyone likes drama and everyone likes to pick a side, I might get your support outside the family first. And then maybe you can see if there are ways to make some inroads. Because I just think drama is painful, right? Like when people get really upset and start pointing fingers, it's already a terribly vulnerable, painful situation from the sounds of things if someone has gone home and experienced that kind of judgment and that kind of rejection.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's a good point. I wasn't thinking about the potential of, creating like teams or sides. Definitely something to be aware of. So, say you're in a situation where it feels like you need to keep going home or going to visit family members, like you don't feel okay cutting that relationship off. You know, it's best for the family to kind of maintain status quo. What coping mechanisms can you offer to a person that, kind of has to brace themselves? Like, I know I'm going into this and it's my choice to keep doing this. What are things to keep in mind or ways to recover from it that you could offer?
I think that's a great question. And I actually speak with my clients about this quite frequently when they're going home to a contentious or an unsafe family situation, regardless of the context. I really do think it's important to have some realistic expectations about what you're going to encounter. And I try to talk with people about what those are and how to maybe find some ways to, if your button is pushed, how do you exit the situation? What are some simple phrases you can say, like, that's a hot topic. Let's talk about this instead. Or, oh, I'm not really ready to have that conversation. Let's change the subject, and to come up with some lower stakes kinds of conversations. It might be more realistic to expect a more superficial kind of interaction. And while that's not satisfying for many of us and very sad, I think it is important to look at, okay, I know my family member tries to pull me into these heart to hearts, but as soon as I let that person in, they wreak havoc on my insides. And I just have to really make a choice that I'm not going to open my heart in the same way. I'll be kind and friendly and curious about them, but I'm not going to share these deeper aspects of myself that have been such a source of pain. I often suggest people to, if you can, maybe you don't stay with the family member, maybe you stay with a family friend or something like that, so you can ensure that you have some of your own space and your own time. So you aren't, in holidays, lots of times family members come and stay under your roof or you go stay under their roof. And it's very difficult to find privacy or a break. And I really try to encourage people to build in opportunities to get out of the house if you're staying in the home. Like, be sure you go for a walk every day or a couple of walks every day. And when you go on a walk, call your friend or have someone you can reach out to who knows what you're going into, who can help you kind of process events. And don't be afraid to give yourself your own space. Again, some families are better at allowing that than others. Those are some of the things that just come to mind for me right off the top.
Staying in the same house together can create fireworks in like the best family relationships.
Yes.
That is excellent advice.
If someone has sort of realized, okay, this relationship, maybe with my parents, someone close to you is not serving you anymore, it's actively harmful, and you kind of need to start creating some space and boundaries in that relationship, but perhaps the other person might not be super amenable to that, as I have found is often the case. What are some strategies for sort of setting up boundaries with someone who is really hurtful to your well-being emotionally?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Sienna, because I think that does happen very often, that people don't recognize the ways in which they are hurtful and they don't want to accept the ways in which they're hurtful. And oftentimes they might actually gaslight you and tell you you're too sensitive or whatever. And I think it is really important to be able to acknowledge to yourself and to say, wow, this relationship right now is not working well for my well-being. I think we can try to fool ourselves into thinking, oh, it'll be fine. I'll be fine. I mean, we've all told ourselves, I'll be fine. That's not true a lot of the time. Or we're fine, but what we have to do to recover from those situations that we kind of denied the lack of safety is a lot. So I think to be able to first acknowledge, okay, this relationship with my parent is actually harmful. and acknowledge that that might make us sad, that might make us angry, that might make us frightened, to really understand the impact of that so that we are not denying our own experience. In terms of setting boundaries, I'll give an example of maybe you live in the same town and you are expected to come for Sunday dinner every weekend, and you've decided that that's not something that you really want or should do for your own well-being. I think we have to find ways to share our boundaries, which is basically about what we are willing to tolerate. Our boundaries don't control anyone else. Our boundaries are about what we are willing to do. So to be able to say, I've acknowledged that it has been very important, the Sunday dinners, but that you actually have something else that is important to you that you would like to do at those times, and that you're no longer going to be able to attend those dinners, but you really appreciate that they've included you. Your family member is going to be disappointed, at least, if not maybe feel like they don't have control over you or control over what they want. And they are allowed to be disappointed, and you are not responsible for fixing their disappointment. I think that is really critical because often in families, we get messages that we are responsible for making sure that our family members feel good about who they are, their roles, their relationships with us. And it is a tall order to really grapple with that we are not responsible for whether or not they're happy. That isn't a one and done decision. That is a over and over and over again decision to make. In this example, every Sunday when you get the invitation to come for dinner and you decline. And if you are not wanting to divorce yourself from your family, maybe there are some smaller ways that you can stay in contact where you have a whole lot more control over how vulnerable you might get. So maybe you have a phone call every Saturday morning, or you send an email about here's my weekly update, or you find a way to sort of maintain a connection while also protecting your safety. And over time, that allowing your family members to be disappointed gets, I don't even want to say easier, we tolerate it better, right? I think we care about our families even when they hurt us. And it's a really important lesson to wrestle with, that we aren't responsible if they are unhappy. Again, my mind thinks in like a web. So I go to places where, are you in an abusive family? Is there a risk of danger? Is there, right? Like I think about all these potential complexities, but in general, I think it is a really important lesson for us to learn that as adults, even as children, we're not responsible for whether our family is happy.
I have a really strange devil's advocate kind of question.
Yeah.
Because I'm always trying to imagine what the other person is thinking when somebody has done something that I'm just like, what is happening? Like, I'm trying to imagine what's going on in their heads. What is their perspective? What is their side of this? If you had somebody come to you, say, homophobic grandpa has come to you as a patient, and to all of the things you just said is saying, I'm not responsible for making my grandchild happy. I'm not going to go against my religious beliefs just to make her feel good. What would you say to that?
Well, again, this is an interesting dynamic also because from my perspective, parents have to be responsible for the impact of their behaviors, just as we have to be responsible for the impact of our behaviors. And so I probably would say to that homophobic grandfather, okay, so I understand these are your beliefs. Is a relationship with your grandchild important to you? And why would your grandchild need to become who you say they need to be in order for you to have a relationship? Could you see some problems with that? You are approaching this understandably from a generational perspective, perhaps from a religious perspective. And I can appreciate this is hard for you. The world is a different place than it used to be. What is your priority here? Is your priority to be right about your opinions about your family member, or is your priority to be in a relationship with your family member in some capacity, right? You don't have to like what they're doing. You don't have to understand what they're doing. Do you want to be able to have holiday dinner with your family member? And I'd see what he had to say.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what homophobic grandpa had to say to that. Love that. I mean, I think there's so much personal accountability that people don't want to take. I think they feel so justified in their views, especially if they come from this like religious tradition or whatever, that they can't imagine that they're doing anything that bears responsibility for harming the relationship. I think to them, it's all the choices that that person is making that are harming the relationship.
Right. I do also think, like in my other example about Sunday dinner, how you decline the invitation to Sunday dinner also matters, right? Do you say, take your pot roast and stick it where the sun don't shine, right? Probably not the best plan. Like, I think there are ways to communicate even when we are declining an invitation that are more or less respectful and considerate of the person's feelings. So how we communicate matters too.
So in that scenario, do you think it is important to not, and maybe they could guess it, but to not let on that that is the reason that you don't want to go to Sunday dinner anymore?
I actually think that's a great question. I think it would depend on how explicit the conflict has been previously. Like, I think if it has been made explicit that this family member doesn't agree with your lifestyle choices, in quotes, that I think it's okay to say, I'm having a really hard time. I want to be connected with you, but I'm finding this as a real obstacle for me. And right now, I just need some space to sort of figure out how to be in a relationship with you in a way that feels good to both of us. But if it has never been spoken about, then I think that would be some families just don't talk about these things, right? I think that might be a bolder move, if you will, to sort of name the problem. Not necessarily a wrong move if you can do it respectfully and with some compassion, but it would be a bolder move if you come from a family where you just don't talk about things at all.
I know I have to preface every one of these questions with there are a million factors that might, affect the answer to this. But
Sure.
Does it seem if you're in a family that has fairly open relationships, or not open relationships, open communication, are there scenarios where you could see it being helpful or productive to sit down and have a conversation? Like, I know that you don't approve of this, but this is who I am, and actually try to have a discourse? Or does it seem like that would usually end in tears?
Well, it might end in tears anyway, but I think especially if you felt like you had an ally in the room, and if the family has had hard conversations before, I think it's certainly worth a try. I think I would suggest, if I was talking with a patient about it, is that it would be important for them to be ready for whatever the outcome was, like emotionally prepared. If they initiate this conversation, to be prepared for that it might possibly not go as well as they would hope. I think I would try to work with that person before having the conversation to say, what is the outcome you're hoping for by initiating this conversation? And sometimes that's useful to be able to just say from the get-go at the beginning of the conversation, my hope is this conversation will help each of us understand one another better, right? If that's the outcome you want, it's good to make that explicit so that the other person knows that you're not actually expecting them to do anything different in that moment. Maybe you are expecting a different behavior. I want to be able to bring my same-sex fiance to Christmas next week, right? That might be a short time. That might be hard. Next year, could we set up a series of conversations? Could we see if we could move toward having my partner included in our family celebration? But I think knowing what you want before you go in, if you're going to have those conversations, is probably a really important idea, because otherwise it's so emotionally charged. We can just get discombobulated and then we don't know what we're trying to accomplish. And once you've accomplished it, stop the conversation, right? Like, I think the other thing is these conversations can become hours long, and that's just too much for everybody to tolerate. So set a time limit and have a good sense of where you're aiming.
I like that idea of, can we have a series of conversations? Because probably by asking that question, you can get a lot from the answer to that question, whether it's worth trying to do that or not.
Yeah, definitely.
Close that door pretty quickly. Are there things that you consider in trying to have those conversations and trying to explain your perspective to a person that's somewhat closed-minded that are just really ineffective things to say?
Well, what I think about when you're asking that question is if someone has really made up their mind and there is no movement, I think anything you say is going to be ineffective, right? Like, I think maybe one of the things to establish is you're not necessarily trying to change the person's mind, but you're wondering if they would be open to the possibility that you may experience things differently than they experience things. And that you don't necessarily have to agree, but are they even open to considering that there are other points of view that are different from theirs and that they're not wrong? They're not wrong points of view. They're just different, or wrong experiences. They're just different. I think there are some people out there who have really doubled down on their beliefs. And it wasn't in the realm of LGBTQ plus kinds of issues specifically, but I am aware of some research in the last probably 10 years on how if you give evidence, right, if you start to present a case on an issue and someone has already made up their mind, either for or against the issue, you can give them all kinds of disconfirming evidence for their beliefs. And what actually happens is it just strengthens their beliefs, right? Like, people will just dig in harder on what they believe, even if you're giving them reality as opposed to fake news, right?
Yeah.
So
I just read that too. I just started online master's in political psychology. And one of my readings was about this study where they had people read a manufactured news article, and then some people were given a correction afterwards that that's not actually what happened, and some people weren't. And a lot of people, if it went against sort of their political ideology, especially, they called it the backfire effect. Having the information corrected made them double down on what they thought, more likely to stick with their original opinion.
Yes, exactly.
Makes me think also, I took a campaign management class a couple years ago, and then I was canvassing over the summer. And one of the things that we learned is that, a lot of times, and it comes up in discourse a lot, where people are like, oh, well, we just want to have conversations between people. And so politicians, when they're knocking on people's doors, they'll say, oh, well, I want to knock on the doors of people who disagree with me a little bit because I think I can change their minds. I think I can get them to vote for me. And actually, what happens when you do that is that they're more likely to vote against you than they were before. And so they had there are specific case examples of local level races where there have been officials or candidates who lost their races basically by the number of votes of the doors of people who were lean opposes. Yeah, which is really a little bit sad.
All of this indicates some really disappointing things about people.
Yeah, we're sort of really wanting to get entrenched. It's a much more vulnerable space psychologically to be willing to engage with the gray, or what feels gray to someone who is like, nope, this is my position. It's very threatening. We like to hang on to what we already know. And if you're going to give me really legitimate opposing evidence, I'm still going to hang on to what I know even harder. And I don't know how we move off that, because holy smokes, we're just going further and further apart. And
it's a little discouraging.
It is. There was a lot of sort of tips prior to the holidays that got put onto the American Psychological Association website and on their Instagram and things like that, just talking about try to find common ground. Like, if there are these family members and it hasn't been deeply hurtful and you do have to spend time with people, try to find the places where you have some common ground, whether that's about liking to ski or enjoying a hike or looking at birds, or I mean, again, it's not really particularly deep and emotionally meaningful potentially, but it is a way of kind of building a bridge and creating some minimally positive, if not more, interaction with this contentious family member. And just stay away from the topics where you disagree. And again, then go take a walk and talk to your friend who gets you.
Yeah.
And who understands how hard it is.
It's important to have those outlets for sure.
Yeah.
Are there any specific resources that you would suggest? We have all of the, helpline and all of that kind of stuff on our website. But just if you're coming out of a really rough family situation, just feeling like really bad about things, are there any resources that you would recommend to people that could be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly in the context of our conversation today, I think, and I'm sure you have this like PFLAG or some other groups that are specifically support these kinds of family rejection and that have that contextual awareness, I think is so helpful. If it's hard for you to find friends, there is the helpline, there is the help center in Bozeman, the 211, or if you're really in crisis, then national hotline for 988, like if you're really feeling alone. I don't have any sort of off the top of my head other wonderful resources. I suspect you guys already know what they all are, even more than I do probably, but a counselor or therapist I think is usually a good idea if you really are having a hard time talking through your family situation and you're not getting as much traction as you need with your friends. They may be supportive, but they may not be really generating some useful ways of thinking about it or approaching. I think a therapist is not a bad idea. There may be some group therapies that are available, which also sort of does double duty. It gives you some support from peers as well as some professional input. And then just patience. Journal, walk, move your body. Trauma sort of sit in our body, and lots of times we might freeze and just kind of shut down and isolate. And it is just really important, especially if we've gone through something hard, to do some gentle movement. We don't have to go and like crush a 10K. All we have to do is walk around the block and breathe and swing your arms or do a little bit of yoga or do even some stretching to move the stress hormones through your body, stay hydrated. Things like that. All of that is helpful. We live inside of a body. It is important to take care of it, especially when we're in stress. So eating well, not over caffeinating, not too much alcohol, all of that can help us carry ourselves through the stressful circumstances.
All good advice. Thank you again. It's been really interesting talking to you. Kind of opened up a lot of questions and you had great answers.
I'm so appreciative of you guys inviting me, really. I think what you're doing is really important. So I'm excited to have been able to come talk with you both.
So next week, we are going to talk about the effects of social media, both positive and negative, for young people, especially young queer people, and how that enters the political discourse.
Until then, stay warm. There's a big cold snap apparently hitting the whole country or something. I don't know. It's hard to tell in Montana, but we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found this episode interesting, informative, amusing, please review and follow us on your podcasting platform of choice. Getting those reviews and follows really helps us show up more in the algorithm and be able to reach more people to help them. You can find us on social media, Instagram and Threads at queerkid.straightmom, Blue Sky at qksm.bsky.social, and Facebook at queerkidstraightmom. We are no longer on Twitter.
And if you're feeling especially generous, please consider joining our Patreon by searching Queer Kids Straight Mom. It helps us fund this podcast.